Today on Photowrk, we have fashion photographer Emily Teague.
Yep, she's a photographer who's partnered with companies such as Capture One, SmugMug, and even Flickr.
And she shares with us on the show why she transitioned from Lightroom to Capture One.
So stay tuned and enjoy.
Hi, Emily.
Hi, guys.
Hi, we just met.
Finally.
In real life.
About an
It's
hour
been
ago.
a couple of years.
Yes.
It's been many years.
Yes. It's great to finally see you in person
Yeah, it's
after
very overdue.
following you for many years.
Yeah, I've been a huge fan of your guys' work.
Oh,
It's
thank
cool
you.
to know you're like real people.
Very We're just some AI in the background,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. To see little avatars on Facebook, be like, it's probably what they look like.
Yep.
This is us.
Beautiful.
So we wanted to start off with how you got started in the photography and retouching world.
Yeah. So I started when I was 16. My uncle had gifted me with a class at the FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. It was just like a 3-day workshop kind of class, and you could choose anything. So there was like jewelry making, cloth design, all this different stuff, and I had no idea because I'm really bad with my hands.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just destroy stuff. So my friend had been doing photography, and I had done some modeling for her, Christina Shellhouse, if you guys are familiar with her. Yeah. And so I thought like, if I take this photography class, it'll make me a better model for her. And I was really intimidated by photography, just by cameras, by all of it. And I was like, no, like this is something I should push myself to do. And so I picked up my first digital camera and instantly fell in love. And I was like, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. Like it was that instant.
Wow.
By the end of the day, I was like, I'm a photographer now. And it never stopped. My love only increased. And so I came back to Chico, California, and I started working with different local models and makeup artists. And I think very quickly went in a fashion direction. Originally it was portraits, but I definitely felt that pull towards more elaborate setups or interesting clothing, getting kind of wild with hair and makeup. So yeah, it's been really wild.
So born and raised in Chico, California?
Pretty much. Originally born in Southern California.
Okay.
Came here when I was 3 years old to Paradise, California.
Oh.
Grew up in Paradise, which is just about 30 minutes away from Chico, and then came to Chico when I was 13. So I consider Chico my hometown. It's definitely, this is my nest.
Nice.
And for those of you who don't know, Chico is in Northern California, and it's a smaller town, a college town.
90,000 people?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's cute.
It is a very cute town.
Not the best for fashion work,
Definitely not the best for fashion work.
but it is cute.
Yes. So you're 16 in New York.
Yeah.
That's got to be crazy.
It was great. So my uncle lived there, and he's been a huge influence to me as well. So I just took this 3-day workshop that was really fantastic, and such an interesting experience to learn a lot in 3 days. To learn about shutter speed, aperture, ISO, and really, like as a 16-year-old, to really understand what that means and how they're connected, and how they are all related. It was interesting. Yeah, I loved it.
That's really cool.
And then you just hit the ground running.
I did. I haven't stopped yet.
Seriously.
Yeah, something that photographer friends of mine would tell me is like, you're going to burn out. And they'd be like, after 4 years, you're going to be over it. And I remember being like kind of angry about that. I was like, no, like I'm going to show you. So I'm on year 7 now. And I'm like, hoo-hoo. Yeah. And I definitely, there's no burnout. I think if anything, I feel more inspired by the more that I learn. And I never want to stop learning or growing or pushing. So yeah, that's good.
True passion.
Yeah.
It just fuels you.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, I teach high schoolers, and it's interesting to see the kids who I'm like, you might be successful, or maybe you won't. I think the big thing is like, if you have this fire in your belly that makes you want to push, because photography is not necessarily like if you want to make money, deciding that you're going to be a photographer maybe isn't the smartest idea to start off with.
Yeah.
I think any parent who ever has a kid who's like, I'm going to be a photography major in college is just like kind of weeping in the corner.
Yeah, how about a lawyer?
Yeah, right.
Finance?
But
Doctor?
I think, if you do want to be a photographer, you need that fire to go against all common sense, and just never stop running with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Since we're on burnout,
Yeah.
or the possibility of it,
Yeah.
what do you, I've heard of, I've even experienced it, and all I did was kind of change what I was shooting.
Yeah.
When I realized I was burnt out on what I was shooting.
Yeah.
That's, do you think that attributes, wow,
Yeah.
I just threw that question right in the
No,
can.
no,
No, I get
but
what you're
I
saying.
get what you're
But yeah,
saying.
do you think that's why you haven't experienced burnout? Is because you've
Yeah.
continually you just push yourself to grow. You always shoot different things.
I do. So when I started, I did a lot of portrait work. That was pretty much the only thing I did because there was no designers in Chico. I didn't know how to work with stylists. I didn't know how to get clothing. So my focus was just on portraits. And it was great, but then slowly I got a little bored with that. So I was like, okay, we need to spice this up a little bit. And I think in the beginning, I rushed really quickly. So there was a headdress designer, Miss G Designs, who I saw when I was 16, and I was like, oh my gosh, her work is brilliant. It's like these elaborate big headdresses, and I was like, that's what I want to shoot. And so I messaged her when I was 16 or 17, and she didn't get back to me, and I was really sad about it. So I messaged her again when I was 18, and she got back to me, and then the conversation kind of fell off. And then I messaged her again that year, and I was really persistent about it. Like, I wanted to shoot her designs. They were so beautiful. And finally, she's like, yeah, let's do it. I was like, yes. And so I started shooting for her, and we've continued to work together even now. We just talked a couple days ago about shooting. It's cool to see those things to really happen. But yeah, going back to the question, so I went from portraits to that, and then kind of got tired of that, and then went more commercial, which I think is where I'm at now. So the past year, I've been doing a lot of tests with agencies. I think for a while I felt insecure about studio lighting, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna shoot nothing but studio.
Yeah.
And so that's what the past year has been for me, and it's been great, and I'm at the point where I'm like, oh yeah, I got this down, and I'm starting to feel like that same, not boredom, but like restlessness. I'm like,
Yeah.
I gotta mix this up. So I'm excited just to see where these next few months are gonna take me, because I want to keep shooting in studio, but I do want to mix it up with different concepts, with working with better teams. So yeah, I think definitely always changing, pushing yourself to grow. I think you can never, you can't become too stable. Yeah.
Yeah. So the variety,
Yeah.
essentially, and the drive.
Yeah. A little
There we
fire
go.
in the belly.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a lot of good tips. You're right. If you are in this industry for money only, you can't last. There's no way.
Yeah, especially starting out. Like,
Yeah, you won't make it.
If there's a high schooler who comes to me and they're like, I want to do this because I want to be a millionaire, I'm like, you should look at a different career.
Yeah.
You know, there's a ton of money within photography, of course.
Of course.
But I don't think that's the reason you should start doing it.
Yeah.
Right. You have to have the love for it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
kind of
The passion.
the passion to be
Yep.
like, I'm going to say fuck it to all common sense and just
Right.
do this.
I'm going to persevere
Oh.
through the dry times.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I love doing this.
Right.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of dry times.
I have a lot of these high school kids come to me and they're like, I want to start shooting for National Geographic now. And even people who haven't, on Instagram, sometimes I get these messages from people who are like, hey, I want to shoot runway, I want to shoot for magazines, I want to shoot all this stuff. And I'm like, great, let me go look at your portfolio. And they're like, oh, I don't have one. I'm like, okay, send me over some photos that you've taken. And they're like, oh, I haven't yet. I'm like, okay, well, you can do this. They're like, great, I want to do it now. I'm like, no. You can't. Like, it takes so many years and perseverance and passion and blood, sweat, and tears, and you have to be okay with that. You have to know that's what you're up against.
Yeah. The competition too. That alone.
Yeah, the competition as a woman, other men in the industry can be kind of frustrating. If you're starting out at 16, I think something that I really struggled with was feeling like put down by people that were older than me. Even making the switch from being like a Chico model to being a photographer, like I was put down for that. Like there was a photographer who I looked up to at the time who was kind of like, get back in your place. I'm like, whoa, yeah. So you can't let that stuff bother you. You just kind of have to push through.
Yeah. Going off of like having high schoolers hit you up, like how do I shoot runway? How do I do that?
Yeah.
Just because we that's what we're here. We're trying to teach, give people those resources. Like here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to know. What would you say is a good first step for somebody who wants to become a photographer? Specifically, let's stay with fashion or runway.
Shoot. Like shoot,
Yeah.
and then shoot again, and then shoot again, and then shoot again. It just comes down to shooting, to experimenting, testing. and experimenting with everything, like experiment with different light, experiment with different models, different makeup artists, experiment with stuff you might not like. You know, you have to shoot a ton and never stop shooting. You know, I think going back to what we said earlier, these kids who are coming to me and they're like, I want to do it now. You can't. That's not going to happen. So the number one thing is shoot a ton, and then also be really curious. I don't know if shoot a ton or be curious. I think they're equally important.
Right.
But, you know, I would say look for every possible way that you can grow, and there's so many ways. It doesn't have to be through the traditional education world, especially now. Like, we have so many opportunities. There's online education that you can do. There's books. There's mentors.
Yeah, shoot a lot.
So yeah, shoot a lot, experiment, be curious, ask for help. I think that's something that I've been learning and still continue to learn, is like figure out what your problem is, what you need, and then ask for it. I've been doing this for a while now, and I'm still amazed by it every time it works. I'm like, oh yeah, I need this thing. I'm like gonna send it out into the world, and there are helpers in the world. I think that's something that I want to be now for other people. But you know, there's always people that are gonna want to help you. So if you just have to find those people and avoid the assholes.
Yeah.
But yeah, shoot, be curious, and ask for help. I think those are like the three main things that I'm like, do this.
Yeah. Relationships, like just getting jobs alone. It's not. Would you say? My experience is not just the work.
No. Oh no.
It's
I would
the
say,
personality, the human, the person behind it.
Yeah, I would say so many of my jobs have come from friendships, which I'm really grateful for. But like, if you are a decent human, you tend to be more successful.
Yeah.
I mean, relationships is huge. You know, I think at a certain point, everyone's work looks decent, right? Like, you have the work down, you can produce good light, consistent quality of work. But really, you need to be likable. You need to be someone who, when you're on set, you're a pleasant person to be around, and people want to hire you again because they're like, oh, I like being around this human. Yeah, I think relationships is everything.
Yeah, you're going to spend 12-hour days with somebody. You don't want them to be a jerk.
No, absolutely.
I think those, because that used to be kind of at least in my understanding, it used to be kind of the norm, is like, oh, I'm X.
Yeah.
I can be whoever I'm. How do I say this without being offensive? I can be a jerk because my work's that good.
And everything was so closed off and limited. There literally was only a handful of fashion photographers that shot everything, 20 years ago.
And I definitely think you're right. Like, that's changing. I think Terry Richardson being banned from Vogue is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Like, he got away with this for so many years, for being a jerk, for being a creep, and people were just like, oh, but he has good work.
It's good work.
I think finally it's at the point where people are putting their foot down. I'm like, no, if you are a creep and a jerk and a terrible human, you don't get to work with us, which is great. So definitely your work matters, but also relationships really matter, and being a decent human matters.
Yeah.
I wanted to segue into your trip to India to cover a very serious topic of sex trafficking. You were also sponsored by SmugMug to do so, which is shout out to SmugMug.
My people.
I would love to hear all about how that came to be.
So I had just left a job in Missouri, and part of the deal with myself is like, if I left this job, I would go to India. And I'd been wanting to go forever, but also I've been doing more and more photojournalism projects. So the last big one I did was on human trafficking in Ghana, which I'll avoid. I mean, that's a whole other topic. But I have really been getting more into trafficking, and what I really wanted to focus on was sex trafficking. So I'd been talking with one of my friends from SmugMug, Alistair, and just kind of told him about this project, and he was really interested in it. We were going to meet at the Photo Plus Expo in New York, and he said, why don't you tell our head of marketing about this? And so we all talked together, and I told them what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and why it's really important. And they were like, what can we do to help? So one of the things I really love about SmugMug is that they, as a company, really care, because that's not an easy subject to go after. And I think a lot of companies would avoid something so tragic and uncomfortable to talk about. So shout out to SmugMug for caring and wanting there to be a spotlight on that. And it was all put together really quickly. So I went at the end of November. My last project I had done, I worked with one organization. This one, I worked with 5 different organizations throughout India, which made it a lot harder. So I went to Delhi, Patna, Muzaffarpur, Kolkata, Jaipur, a village near Jaipur, then back to Delhi. And it was intense. It was exhausting. Physically, it was really exhausting. Mentally and emotionally, it was really exhausting. So basically what I was doing there was going to shelters, going to a lot of places, but primarily shelters, and interviewing these girls that had been trafficked. And their ages mostly ranged from 16 to 18. There was a woman that I interviewed who was also in her 30s. But, the stories are so similar of, a lot of these girls are coming from Bangladesh or from Nepal, getting tricked into this, and they don't have a solid support network to get them out of this. So basically what I'm working on now is the article that's going to accompany that, and that comes out March 8th, which is International Women's Day. And on my side, it will kind of talk about the specific interviews with the girls, their stories, but also a lot of statistics about sex trafficking, both in India and in the world, because it's a global issue. It's everywhere. It's in the U.S. as well. And that's definitely, for me, the next thing that I want to focus on, because I think it's something we really push under the rug. Like, we're aware of it. We know it's a thing, but we have no idea how huge it is. I would say, there's hotels that have rings for sex trafficking. Like, Motel 6s have been caught doing this. Cops have been caught doing this. It's everywhere, and it's such a huge issue that I definitely want there to be more focus on.
Yeah, that's definitely a hard topic to cover, and I'm sure SmugMug, that's good for them to put the spotlight out there.
Yeah, I can't say enough how much I respect them for kind of going out on a ledge and focusing on that, despite it being either for some reason controversial or uncomfortable to talk about.
Uncomfortable, yeah.
Yeah. It's not shiny marketing, right?
No. Yeah. And that, not to gush about SmugMug, but, that is something that they really support what their creators are doing. And I feel very supported by them. So, yeah, I love that they're not afraid to talk about it. And I love that they're really passionate about work that's being done.
Yay. Shout out SmugMug. Yes. And it sounds like your connection to SmugMug came from a friend. Is that what you're saying?
So I went to, the first time I ever met with them was at the photography show in England, which I'm getting ready to go back to next week. Yeah. So it's similar to the expos in the US, like WPPI or the photography show. The reason that I go to them is that's where all my friends are. It's the couple times a year where photographers from all over the world get together. And that's definitely where I developed my community, which I am so grateful for. So a couple of my friends, Bella and Pratik, who an amazing photographer and retoucher, they introduced me to SmugMug, and they're both ambassadors for SmugMug as well. And I met with Alistair there, who is the global marketing manager, but every time I introduce him to someone, I say this is the King of Scotland, or this is the owner of SmugMug, and he's like, Emily, you can't say that. But yeah, we really hit it off, and he saw my work, and immediately was like, let's talk, and we just kind of built a relationship, and I've been with them for a couple of years now, and they're fantastic. I feel really lucky to be with them.
With your involvement in expos, photo expos, and Photo Plus, we've been to Photo Plus. What do you do?
WPPI.
Just got back from that one in Vegas. The body is recovering.
Yep.
Oh yeah, that one's definitely more fun. After hours.
I used to go to PPA.
PPA.
I haven't heard
they haven't had
Professional
a show
photographers. Yeah, it was in
Wait,
Vegas.
They probably still have a show, but it's a long time.
It was huge back in the day. But with those, they offer a lot of those conventions or expos will offer portfolio review.
Yeah.
Do you have an opinion about?
Oh, I think it's great. I think it's super important. I think one of the best ways to grow is to have others critique your work, and not just one person, but as many people as possible. Something that I do is if there's a photographer I really admire that I am friends with, I want to hear their opinion, because I respect them and I want to know what they think of my work. And I'm so, not just me, but we're also biased about our work, And I'll speak for myself now, but there's so many images where there's an emotion or a memory connected to it.
Right.
I had this image in my portfolio for, 4 years now. I just let it go recently, but it was shot in Paris with a makeup artist. My first time using gold flake, and this is still when I was like really in the phase of like everything, like grandiose, as elegant and rich as it can get. And so I remember like really loving that we were using gold flake. I thought it was so cool that it was a shoot in Paris. My team didn't speak English. Like it was a lot of work. And there was a lot of like memory and emotion tied into that shoot. And the images were great, especially at the time. They were the best I shot. But, you know, it was 4 years ago. So now it's the oldest stuff in my portfolio. And I've known for a while that it's going to be time soon to let it go. And I've had a couple of reviews this past year where they just kind of confirmed, like, you got to let it go. So that one's a little more obvious. But there's other images where maybe I went to one photographer and they're like, this image has to go, and I didn't get rid of it, and I went to a different photographer or a reviewer, and they're like, no, this is one of your strongest ones. So it can be also it can be tricky, which is why it's good not to just go to 2 photographers or 3 photographers, but as many as possible. And if you really love an image and someone says to get rid of it, don't necessarily get rid of it. Maybe see a couple other photographers' opinions as well before you do. I think another really important thing, I went to a free review recently in New York, and I thought, wow, this is really cool. And it was just kind of a thing where you had like 5 different reviewers in the room, and you could go to whichever one you wanted. And most of them were wedding photographers. And so I sat down with one guy, and he was very sweet. He's an older guy. And he said, you know, what do you shoot? And I said, oh, I shoot fashion. He said, oh, I know nothing about that. And I said, oh, that's okay. And I'm like, this is kind of awkward. Like, you know, I'm here. Like, what do I do? And so he looked at my website. He's like, this is really nice work. I'm like, thank you. And it was just like, good job. So also, the thing that I'm trying to say is like, make sure you're having people review your work that are within your specific industry. So like if you're a wedding photographer, have other wedding photographers review your work. If you're a commercial photographer, have other commercial photographers view it. You know, for this guy specifically that I saw, there were images where he's like, yeah, this is really great, where a commercial photographer might see it and be like, no, like, what's the point of this? Like, if I'm shooting fashion, like, is there a mood being told here? Is this focusing on the clothing? Where maybe a wedding photographer might see it and be like, oh, this is really pretty. Not to bash on wedding photographers, but we all have different things that we look for within images.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, that's a good tip, is to research who is looking at your work. Because not all portfolio reviews are equal, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
But also taking it with a grain of salt.
And a grain of salt, too.
Like who's it's coming from. It's always good to have multiple opinions, even if they're outside your realm.
Yeah.
Just how much weight do you put in it?
Yeah. And I know there's photographers that I've been friends with who they've told me stories of getting reviews where the reviewers destroyed them. And like, we're really brutal. And made them not want to continue photography. And I was like, oh man. I mean, one, like, shame on the reviewer for being that harsh, but also it's important to remember that like this reviewer is not the final say, you know, like take it with a grain of salt.
Right. Yeah.
You've recently been partnered with Capture One, which I've been super stoked for you.
Me too, thank
because
you.
it's amazing to be partnered with somebody like Capture One.
I've got a lot of respect for them.
Yes, they're amazing. A shout out to Capture One.
We'll take
other people.
We'll take a sponsorship.
For the record, we're not sponsored, but Emily is partnered with them. And can you talk about your experience working with them?
Yeah, so I started working with them earlier this year. And I had a Capture One license for about a year and a half. And I knew that I had to make the switch. Like, you know, it's industry standard. It's a much more advanced program. I had read all the reasons for why it was important to make the switch. And I had seen the difference when you first import an image into Capture One versus when you first import an image into Lightroom. Like, you can immediately see that richness in color, the quality. So I knew it was important, but I was also really intimidated by it. You know, it's a very different interface, and I was so used to my workflow. You know, I started using Lightroom before I started photography. So I told you guys I had been modeling for that friend of mine. she would give me some of the images and I wanted to edit them and I didn't know what to do. So I started using Lightroom. That was a really cool start to photography. It probably made it a lot easier. So when I actually started using it though, I think I got in there and I was like, okay, today's the day. You're not leaving this bedroom until you start working in there. So I just started fiddling with everything in Capture One. I started right clicking. I started trying to drag, and it was a surprise when like I would try to drag something, it would actually drag. I'm like, oh, this is cool. And it started becoming kind of fun to like troubleshoot and figure out like here's an issue, how do I fix this issue? And then anytime that I didn't figure out how to fix the issue, on their website they have something called the Learning Hub, and it's just a ton of free webinars, tutorials, little clips on how to do everything. So especially even for getting started, there's like an introductory video being like, this is this, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this is this. Like, this isn't so intimidating. So that was really helpful to me. And then I just really got into it. So I started using it for all my street photography in India. And it was really interesting just to compare the before and afters of like, okay, I had already edited this photo in Lightroom, so this is what it looks like. And then editing it in Capture One and being like, oh, wow, that's a really major difference. So yeah, we've been doing some stuff together. I just did I'm in the process of doing a Capture One takeover for them on Instagram. So I'm excited about that. And then there's a blog post coming out soon with them, talking about my switch from Capture One to them. And we did we did a webinar. I like woke up at 3 a.m. because they're based in Denmark. So that was fun to like get up early and be like, good morning. But yeah, I'm excited to continue doing some cool stuff with them.
How did they find you?
So actually, going back to the photography show, I think I met David Grover, who I want to say is like the king of Capture One. I'm just going to give all my friends like new titles.
Is he the main guy that does all the webinars?
He is, yeah.
Okay, I totally know him.
Yep, if you hear like a lovely British voice,
yes,
that's David.
Hello, David.
Yeah. So David and I met at the photography show, and we had a bunch of mutual friends, and so we became friends on Facebook, and we just followed each other for a while. And then he saw the work that I was doing in India, and he said, hey, Emily, is it possible, could we use some of these images for webinars? And I said, absolutely. And he said, are you using Capture One? And I like kind of looked away. I was like, well, because I'd been using it for tethering, but then once I was done tethering, I would import them into Lightroom, and that just like broke his heart, which I think is what a lot of people do, because it's far superior for tethering. I mean, it's superior for everything, but drastically compared to Lightroom. Lightroom goes really slow with that. So he was like, start playing around with it. Here's a 30-day trial, and kind of in exchange for the images, he gave me a new license. And I was like, okay, I need to learn now. And so it was fun talking with him because I would give him updates every day. Like, did you know you could do this? And he's like, yeah, Emily, I know. But I was just so excited. Like, I was messaging him daily, like showing before and afters and being like, look what I just found out. And so that's been really fun. Or like, I'll go to him. Recently I went to him and I was like, David, did you know that you can't just press like Command C and Command Z or Command V to copy and paste? Like, you need to get on that. And he's like, actually, if you could press like Command Shift C, then you can do it. So I'm learning a ton from him still, and it's been really fun to learn more.
For people that haven't made the switch to Capture One, what would you say to bring them over?
Yeah, I would say just do it. I mean, really, like if you tell yourself, okay, today's the day, mark it on the calendar, say, I am spending just 30 minutes learning. That's all you need. Because one, it won't just be 30 minutes. Like the moment you get into it, it starts making sense. The easiest way would be to go to the Learning Hub, check out those introductory videos, just like the first 5, and you're golden. Like just do that. It was interesting because while I was writing this blog post for Capture One, I was talking with my roommate, Randy Nicole, who's also a really talented photographer, and she was in the exact same boat that I was. She really wanted to make the switch to Capture One. She'd been using Lightroom for 10 years, was really used to it, but also knew that she had to make that switch. And I was like, let's just do it right now. And she's like, right now? I was like, yeah, like let's see how quickly you can learn this. Conveniently, I'm going to tie this into my blog article. So I added her into it. So we opened up the Learning Hub for her. She watched the first 5 videos, and really within an hour for sure, she felt proficient, and she's just taken it from there and soaring with it. So now she'll like text me and be like, did you know you can do this? And unlike where David, I'm telling him, I'm like, no, I didn't.
Circling back to you.
Yeah, so it's really fun to see someone else have the exact same process that I had. And I think for so many photographers, it's the same thing. Like, we're intimidated by it, but if we just spend 30 minutes doing it, and really, really dedicating yourself to doing it, because there were so many times I would open the program and fiddle around and be like, well, maybe next time. But if you use your resources, like the Learning Hub, which is entirely free, and you go back to fiddling around after that, I do think that is such an easy switch to make.
Yeah, 30 minutes, and it's a free trial.
Yeah, 30-day free trial.
Yeah.
For you guys interested.
Yeah.
But I think the point is that it's a superior program. I mean, your images, there is a physical difference between the images you get with Lightroom versus Capture One.
And you can see it. There's also just so many added tools. I mean, the color editor alone, you can color grade entirely within Capture One. Like, how cool is that? I just keep discovering new stuff. I'm like, what? You can do this? It's kind of like that intermediary between Lightroom and Photoshop, because it has a lot more tools in Lightroom, but you can't liquefy, so it's not Photoshop yet. I mean, definitely all my Photoshop, all my retouching work, I do within Photoshop, and all my, initial work I do within Capture One.
Thank you so much for joining us on Photowrk. Stay tuned for part 2.
Emily Teague talks to us about how to shoot a fashion editorial as well as retouching do's and don'ts.